Lila Crawford never thought a haircut could change her life. Neither did Jonah Reyes. The moment they stepped into that abandoned barbershop, something shifted, air thick with decay, mirrors that didn't reflect reality, and a chair that seemed to breathe. When the first snip fell, it wasn't just hair that vanished. Something else entered, something hungry, patient, and waiting for them to lose control. By the time they realized the truth, the hair was alive, and so was the horror. I had never been to that part of town before. The streets were narrow and uneven, lined with buildings that looked like they had been abandoned for decades. Broken signs swung loosely on their hinges, and the faint smell of damp wood and rust lingered in the air. I had no particular reason to walk that way, except that my hair had grown wild and unmanageable, and I was searching for a place, any place that might offer a simple haircut. That's when I saw it, a barbershop that seemed almost unreal, as if it had been waiting just for me. Its sin, faded and cracked, read-only Barber and peeling letters, and the glass window was so grimy that I could barely see inside. Something about the shop made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just the decay or the shadows that seemed to twitch unnaturally. It was a feeling, low and insistent, like the place itself was alive and aware of me. I hesitated in front of the door, brushing my fingers against the rusted handle. The metal was icy cold, and the moment I touched it, a shiver ran up my spine. My heart pounded as if warning me to turn away, but the need for a haircut, something ordinary, mundane, propelled me forward. I pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, almost viscous, carrying a strange odor that reminded me of rotting wood mixed with something metallic. Dust motes floated in the dim light, illuminated by a single flickering bulb above. The walls were lined with mirrors, each cracked in strange patterns, reflecting fragments of the room back at me in dizzying, disorienting angles. The barber chair sat in the center, worn and old, its leather cracked and peeling. It looked almost human, as if it had been molded to hold someone forever. I moved closer, compelled by an impulse I couldn't understand. From the shadows, he appeared. The barber, or whatever he was, emerged quietly, wearing a stained apron that smelled faintly of chemicals. His eyes caught the light, unnaturally bright and sharp, piercing through me as though he could see into my very thoughts. I froze, unable to speak, my legs rooted to the floor. There was no greeting, no hint of friendliness, only a slow, deliberate gesture toward the chair. Something inside me screamed to leave, but I found myself obeying. The chair reclined beneath me as if it had a will of its own. I sat, feeling the cold leather against my skin, and watched as he picked up a pair of scissors. They glinted in the dim light, sharp and almost alive. When he began, the first snip sounded deafening, echoing through my skull. I could feel each cut, each falling strand, as if my hair carried pieces of my memories with it. The barber worked quickly, yet every movement was precise, ritualistic, as though he had been cutting hair this way for centuries. I glanced at the mirrors lining the walls. My reflection trembled unnaturally. It wasn't mimicking me perfectly. Sometimes it lagged behind. Sometimes it moved on its own. One reflection leaned closer, a shadow at its edge stretching and twisting in ways that defied logic. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, and my hands gripped the armrests until my knuckles went white. The more hair fell, the lighter I felt, but also more exposed, vulnerable. My scalp itched, and I imagined that each cut left an opening in me, a door through which something could enter. The barber moved around me silently, his scissors glinting, snipping through my hair as if sculpting something more than just a style. I tried to focus on the floor, on anything other than the mirrors, but the shadows kept creeping, inching closer in reflections that weren't real. When the haircut was over, I touched my head. My hair was gone almost entirely, leaving my scalp bare, cold and raw. I looked up to thank him, to ask how much I owed, but the barber had vanished. The room was empty, silent, except for the faint echo of scissors somewhere in the darkness behind the mirrors. I felt an irrational fear press against my chest, a feeling that the chair itself had absorbed him and now waited for the next customer. I stepped toward the door, my fingers brushing against the glass of the front window. That's when I saw it. Written in condensation on the inside of the glass were words that hadn't been there before. Large, uneven letters spelled, "Not enough, stay." My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my ears. The message seemed alive, shifting slightly as if the letters themselves breathed. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted out the door and ran into the night, the street lamps flickering in a way that made every shadow seem like it was following me. Even now, every time I close my eyes, I see those mirrors, the glowing eyes of the barber and the faint, relentless sound of scissors cutting through the air echoing inside my skull, reminding me that I may have walked out of that shop, but I had never truly escaped it. I woke up in my apartment the next morning with my head pounding, my scalp tender and raw. Sunlight spilled weakly through the blinds, cutting thin lines across the floor, but the brightness didn't help. Something felt wrong, off in a way I couldn't explain. I reached up to touch my hair, and my fingers met something slick, unnaturally long, almost moving beneath my touch. I froze, staring at my reflection in the mirror across the room. My hair had grown back overnight, impossibly fast, and it wasn't like my old hair. It was black, glossy and thick, almost writhing like it had a mind of its own. When I tried to comb it, it resisted, curling around my fingers, tangling like it wanted to hold me down. Every mirror I looked into felt wrong. My reflection didn't quite match me. It blinked when I didn't, tilted its head at angles I hadn't moved, and sometimes, just for a fraction of a second, it grinned. I stepped back, my pulse racing. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, maybe a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the mirrors, from the shadows, from somewhere deep inside my own home. I avoided leaving the apartment for the next few days, but necessity eventually forced me out. I walked the familiar streets, trying to act normal, but I could feel eyes on me everywhere. People stared subtly, unnervingly, and in the reflective surfaces of shop windows, I saw not just my distorted hair, but glimpses of shapes, thin, elongated figures moving independently behind my reflection. I blinked, and they were gone, but the sense of being observed remained. Returning home, I found something that made my stomach drop. My small pair of scissors, the ones I had used to trim my hair for years, were arranged neatly on the kitchen counter. Each blade glinted sharper than I remembered, almost polished to perfection. Next to them was a single strand of hair, black, slick, and impossibly long. It wriggled across the surface like it had a life of its own, moving toward me as if aware of my gaze. My hands shook as I reached for it, but the strand recoiled, curling into intricate patterns that seemed deliberate, almost intelligent. I tried to cut it, to destroy it, but every time I lifted the scissors, the hair moved away, curling and twisting into new shapes, forming letters or symbols I couldn't understand. It whispered my name not in words, but in a vibration deep inside my head. I staggered back, almost falling over. I felt trapped, the air growing thick, heavy, oppressive. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the barbershop, the flickering bulb, the cracked mirrors, and him, the barber, standing silently, scissors poised, watching me. The nights became worse. The hair moved even when I wasn't looking, crawling over my pillow, reaching toward my face while I slept. Sometimes I awoke to strands wrapping around my arms or legs, cold and sharp. I tried burning it, but the flames refused to consume it. I tried shaving it off, but it grew back instantly, thicker and darker than before. My body no longer felt my own. I was a host, a vessel, a puppet. One night, as I sat in my darkened room, the hair shifted suddenly. It moved together, pooling around the floor like a black tide. Shapes formed in the strands, faces grotesque and twisted, screaming silently at me. I felt their eyes on me, and one face, pale and hollow-eyed, turned toward me. I could almost hear it whisper clearly this time, "He isn't done." My stomach turned, and the room felt impossibly large, the walls stretching outward, the mirrors in my apartment reflecting not me, but fragments of the barbershop. I realized I could no longer trust my own senses. The shadows in my apartment no longer obeyed the rules of physics. They shifted toward me when I was looking, flickered at impossible angles, and sometimes, in my peripheral vision, I could see him standing behind me waiting. The whispering continued, now louder, a low hum that seemed to vibrate my skull, shaping thoughts that weren't mine. I was becoming someone else, or perhaps something else, and through it all, the hair kept growing, faster, spreading beyond my scalp. It crept along my arms, my legs, even my torso, twisting and curling in patterns I couldn't understand. I became a prisoner in my own body, a witness to the transformation I could neither stop nor fully comprehend. The barber's presence was everywhere, inside the hair, inside the mirrors, inside me. Then I saw it, reflected in a small mirror near my sink, a pair of scissors moving on their own, cutting strands of hair that weren't my own, shaping them into precise, deliberate lengths. The hair whispered again, louder this time, sending chills through my entire body. I understood with absolute horror that this was only the beginning. I was not the master of my hair. I was a canvas, and the barber, wherever he was still at work. I had stopped trying to fight it. The hair was no longer mine. It moved on its own, spreading across my body, growing faster than I could comprehend, and curling in ways that made my skin crawl. I tried to sleep, to eat, to do anything that felt normal, but it was impossible. Every strand seemed alive, sensing me, observing me, learning me. My reflection in the mirror became more than a reflection. It was a warning. It no longer mirrored me perfectly. Instead, it hinted at a version of myself that I didn't recognize. Eyes wide with panic, hair that writhed like snakes, and lips that whispered silent screams. One night the whispering started. It came from deep inside my head, not my ears. Low, melodic murmurs that carried meaning I could not comprehend, but felt pressing against my thoughts. The hair reacted immediately, growing longer, curling tighter around my limbs, pressing against my chest, constricting slightly as though reminding me that I was no longer in control. I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, feeling the strands wrapping around my neck. I could feel eyes in the hair, watching, calculating. I didn't move, knowing that any sudden motion might provoke it further. I tried to understand what it wanted. I researched, hoping to find someone, anyone, who had experienced something like this. Nothing. No mention of a live hair, no cursed barbershop in any record. Every mention of hair in folklore or legend seemed quaint, distant, powerless against what I was living. My apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. The hair crept along the walls, across the ceiling, pooling in corners like liquid darkness, following me from room to room. The whispers grew louder at night, urging me to return to the barbershop, telling me that I had unfinished business. It wasn't just hair anymore. I saw faces in it, tiny, pale faces, screaming silently, their eyes hollow, mouths opening as if to cry out, but no sound came. One night I traced a finger along a long strand, and a face lifted toward me. Its eyes were wide, knowing, accusing. A cold shiver ran down my spine. It whispered directly to me this time. "He isn't done with you." The voice was hollow, yet somehow intimate, familiar. My scalp burned, my mind reeled, and I realized that I had become a vessel, a conduit for whatever had been unleashed in that barbershop. I could feel the barber's presence everywhere, in every reflection, every strand of hair, every shadow. The scissors, too, moved independently, cutting strands that hadn't been touched, shaping them into patterns I couldn't understand. My sleep became a cycle of terror and exhaustion. Each dream dragged me back to the chair in the barbershop, the cracked mirrors stretching endlessly, and the barber standing silently with those gleaming scissors, inspecting my scalp, deciding which strands were worthy. Every attempt to leave my apartment was futile. The hair reached the doors, curling around the handles, pressing against the frame. It wasn't aggressive, not yet, but it was patient, waiting for me to succumb to its pull. I realized with horror that I had no privacy. No room was safe. The hair followed me into the kitchen, the bathroom, even when I attempted to shower. It writhed in the water, glistening, alive, almost mocking my futile efforts to cleanse myself. I began to notice a strange sensation. The hair was learning me, remembering my movements, predicting my actions. When I tried to reach for a mirror, strands would preemptively wrap around my hands, slowing me down. When I slept, it grew faster, curling across my chest and arms like snakes, creeping toward my face as if to smother me while I dreamed. My body no longer felt mine. I had become a puppet, a canvas, a host for something I could not fight. And yet, the worst part was the realization that I wasn't the first or the last. In my nightmares, I saw others, trapped in hair like mine, their faces screaming silently in mirrors I could not touch. I was part of a cycle, a ritual I could not escape. And the barber, wherever he was still at work, shaping, cutting, trimming, deciding whose hair would grow next, whose soul would be claimed. The hair whispered again, this time more urgently, almost impatiently. I could feel it crawling over my scalp, massaging my skin, pressing against my thoughts. Its message was clear. I was not done. I could feel its intention, sharp and deliberate, moving beneath the surface, wrapping tighter around my limbs and neck, reminding me that no matter what I tried, I would never be free. And then, in a mirror I hadn't noticed before, I saw it, him, the barber, reflected behind me. Scissors raised, eyes gleaming in the dim light. I spun around, and the room was empty. But the hair continued to move, writhing, alive, sentient. I understood then that I was never alone. I never would be. I stopped leaving my apartment entirely. The hair had spread beyond control, covering walls, floor, ceiling, and me. It moved constantly, writhing, curling, stretching like dark tendrils, searching for something. Every mirror reflected not just myself but fragments of the barbershop, the cracked mirrors, the dim light, the chair. I could see him sometimes, the barber, standing behind me in the reflections, scissors poised. I would spin around, only to see empty air. Yet I could feel him, or something of him, inside the hair, inside the shadows, inside my own skin. Sleep had become a torment. Each night, the hair shifted while I lay in bed, coiling around my arms and legs, pressing against my chest and neck. Its movement was deliberate, intelligent, as if it were learning me, anticipating my struggles. The whispers returned, low and insistent, vibrating inside my skull. At first, I could not understand them, but gradually I realized they were commands, urging me to return to the chair, to let the barber finish his work. I resisted, terrified, but the hair itself seemed to pull me toward it, crawling along the floor, snaking across the walls, brushing against my feet whenever I walked. I tried to seek help, though deep down I knew there would be none. Friends and family only saw long, messy hair, nothing unusual, nothing threatening. They couldn't see the faces trapped in it, the writhing black tendrils, or the way it moved with a life of its own. I realized the horror was mine alone. My apartment was no longer a home. It was a prison built from hair, a labyrinth in which I was both prisoner and prey. I researched obsessively, scouring the internet, libraries, and old newspaper clippings for any mention of the barber, the shop, or hair that could move on its own. Every lead ended in frustration. The street didn't exist on any map. Locals had no memory of the barbershop. Legends whispered about cursed barbers who trapped souls in hair, but these were dismissed as old wives' tales. And yet, I knew the truth. The barber had found me, he had chosen me, and now, through the hair, he was always present, always shaping, always waiting. The hair's intelligence became more terrifying over time. It anticipated every action I took. When I tried to touch a mirror, strands of hair reached out, curling around my hands to prevent it. When I moved, the tendrils stretched to block doors, windows, any escape. Even breathing felt controlled. It wrapped around my chest, pressing slightly, a constant reminder that I was no longer free. I felt like a marionette, manipulated by invisible strings of black, slippery strands. One night I saw him again, more clearly than before. The barber's reflection stood behind me in the bathroom mirror. He held scissors that gleamed with a cold metallic light. His eyes were sharp, piercing, unblinking. I tried to turn around, but the hair had coiled around my feet and legs, anchoring me to the spot. My reflection's lips moved in sync with mine, though I wasn't speaking. I felt a cold, surgical precision in the hair, in the air, in the room itself. It was preparing me, selecting me. The barber was ready, and I was powerless. The whispers became a chorus, rising in intensity. They spoke not just to me, but through me, shaping my thoughts, urging me forward. I realized with horror that the barber was inside me now, moving through the hair that had become my body, my prison, my cage. I could feel him combing through strands, trimming, shaping, deciding which pieces were sufficient and which were not. My mind screamed for escape, but my body was no longer mine to control. In the dead of night, I understood the full horror of my situation. The hair had become a network, a conduit for the barber's presence. It wrapped around every surface in the apartment, filled every shadow, crept along the walls, and even hung from the ceiling like black living ropes. I was no longer a human being in the traditional sense. I was a host, a canvas, a puppet for a power I could neither comprehend nor resist. And yet, in some small, horrible way, I could feel it relishing me, feeding on my fear, growing stronger with every heartbeat, every movement, every breath. And then I realized something more horrifying. The barber's presence was indeed just in my apartment. The hair seemed to reach out beyond the walls, touching the edges of the city, watching, waiting, searching. The whispers grew louder still, commanding me to prepare, to accept, to return to the chair one last time. The hair pressed tighter against my chest and neck. I gasped for air, knowing that when the barber finally arrived, there would be no escape. The mirrors all around me reflected my distorted hair-covered form, and behind it, just barely visible, I saw the shadow of scissors, glinting in anticipation. The hair whispered one final, chilling message in a tone that vibrated through my skull and bones: "You will be finished." I woke to silence, but it was the kind of silence that pressed on me, heavy and suffocating. The hair had stopped moving, at least outwardly, but it was everywhere. It covered the walls, floor, ceiling, mirrors, and even parts of me, thick and black, writhing subtly as if breathing. I could feel its weight on my body, the pressure of thousands of strands pressing against my skin, reminding me that I had become part of it. The apartment no longer felt like a space I owned. It was a nest, a vessel, a tomb. I had no idea if hours, days, or weeks had passed since the barber first lured me into that shop. Time had lost meaning. Only the hair remained, eternal, patient, and alive. I tried to move, but even the smallest shift caused the hair to tug at me, tightening around my wrists, ankles, and neck. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't mine. My eyes were wide with terror, my mouth opened in silent screams, and my hair was alive, writhing like serpents, curling into intricate patterns that I couldn't comprehend. It shifted subtly, and in its movement, I could see faint traces of faces, my own face, twisted in agony, screaming silently, as if trapped within the strands forever. The whispers returned, faint at first, then growing louder, vibrating in my skull. They spoke in a language I could not understand, yet their meaning was unmistakable. I was no longer a person. I was part of the hair, a conduit for whatever cursed presence had once inhabited that barbershop. It shaped me, guided me, and reminded me that escape was impossible. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost, absorbed into the mass of living hair that now defined me. Then I felt movement inside myself. It wasn't external, it was something crawling within, something deliberate, calculating. The barber's presence, or whatever essence remained of him, had fully merged with me through the hair. I could sense him combing through the strands that had become part of my body, selecting, trimming, shaping. The sensation was surgical, precise, cold. It wasn't just my body, he had claimed it was my mind, my consciousness, every part of me. I was alive, yet not myself. I looked into the nearest mirror. My reflection smiled without my consent, the hair curling around my face like fingers. Then, in the periphery of the mirror, I saw movement. Another figure, a faint, shadowy outline of a person emerged slowly, moving through the strands as if the hair itself were water, carrying him. The scissors gleamed in the dim light, sharp, glinting. I realized with bone-deep horror that I was no longer alone. Somewhere in the hair, another presence waited, another victim, or perhaps a previous soul trapped like mine, guiding the barber's work. Days, or what I perceived as days, passed, and I became aware of the hair extending beyond my apartment. Strands snaked through cracks in the walls, along the floorboards, into the vents. The whispers followed, spreading to the street below, reaching out toward anyone who might pass that cursed building. I understood, in a terrifying moment of clarity, that the barber's influence was not confined. He had chosen a host, and through me he could reach further than ever before. The thought made my chest tighten. I had become both vessel and lure, a living beacon for the cursed cycle to continue. I tried to resist, to cut away the hair, to reclaim even a fragment of myself, but it was futile. Every strand was intelligent, moving in anticipation of my actions. It wrapped around scissors, knives, even my hands, preventing me from escaping or destroying it. I realized I would never walk outside again. I was trapped, fully and irrevocably, in a body that had become the hair itself. The whispering grew louder. I could almost hear the words clearly. Prepare the next one. I didn't understand whose voice it was, whether it was the barber or the hair or some combination, but I understood the intent. The hair quivered and shifted, forming patterns on the walls and ceiling. Faces appeared within the strands, their mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror, yet they were frozen in place, unable to move. I recognized some of them. They were me, trapped in previous states, caught by the barber's curse, frozen as warnings. I realized that I would never escape. The hair had fully consumed me. My consciousness existed only to serve as a host, a guide for the barber's work, a living trap for the next unsuspecting person who wandered past that cursed street. And somewhere, just out of sight, the barber waited, patiently, in reflections, shadows, and whispers, scissors poised, always ready. And then I understood the final truth, and my mind shattered with it. I wasn't just trapped, I had become the hair. I was the prison. I was the warning. Anyone who passed the street, anyone who saw the flickering sign, anyone who felt the lure of the barber's chair would see me, and not know they were looking at the next victim's fate. I could feel the hair stretching beyond my perception, reaching out, touching, waiting, guiding. The barber's scissors glinted somewhere in the distance, and the whispers promised only one certainty. The cycle would continue and I would never leave. The door swings open. The chair waits. The scissors gleam. The hair curls, writhes, and watches.